You know, Thomas Sowell said, people who love meetings should not be in charge of anything. You know, I tend to agree with him because meetings can be a dead end. They can be a nightmare if they're not handled properly. But the truth is, we have to go to meetings. So in today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about how to use meetings to your advantage, how to get you from where you are to where you want to be in your career. I mean, the truth is, we have to go. So how do we make them more effective? And by the way, at the end of this podcast episode, stay tuned because I'm going to give you some bonus material that will particularly help you in meetings that aren't yours. In other words, how often do we get called into meetings that we don't know anybody there, we don't know what it's about, but we get invited. And trust me, as your career moves forward, as you move up the food chain and up the ladder, you're going to be invited into more and more meetings, whether they're at a Hollywood studio, whether they're a church, whether they're a movie studio, whatever they are, a business, wherever, you're going to be invited to more important meetings and you don't know what's going on in those meetings. Let me tell you, I'm going to give you some keys, some bonus material at the very end of this episode that will help you navigate those meetings more successfully and walk away with your career moving to the next level. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and welcome to this episode about meetings. You know what? I think in most organizations, meeting are the scourge. The problem is there are people inside a lot of organizations today who believe that meetings are their reason for being. They feel like if they can call more meetings, they'll get noticed. And I just hate those kind of organizations. I've literally been in certain organizations that had 15-hour meetings. Some have 8-hour meetings a couple times a week. That's just ridiculous. So I'm not a fan of meetings. At the same time, there are times when you need to get the team together, go over certain things so everybody's playing by the same rules and everybody knows where you're going and we all have a common journey. And today I want to talk about how to conduct effective meetings and how to really use meetings, as long as you've got to go to them, how to use meetings to help move your career forward and how to come out of a meeting with everything you need to know. So first of all, let me give you some background. I mean, most people know the general rules of have an agenda. We've talked about that. You've heard that before. I'm a big believer that you need to print an agenda, give it to everyone when the meeting starts. Why? Because people need to know where this is going. I'm not a big believer in open meetings. I don't think you should have coffee and donuts there. Keep the snacks out of the room. This is not the time to come in and just sit and just shoot the breeze for an hour or two. Meetings should be direct, they should be intentional, they should be there to accomplish something. So we start with just creating an agenda, letting people know what they're getting into before they walk in the room. I think that's very, very, very important. So let me give you some secret things that I've learned over the years that I think will make you much more effective in meetings and help you get more out of meetings. Number one, learn to listen. The single most important thing you can do in a meeting is learn to listen. Now, there are people out there that just feel obligated to blurt out whatever they think at any given moment. I tell you, that just will kill a meeting. Some people, it's insecurity. They want to feel like they're making a contribution. They want the people around them in their company to feel like they have great ideas and what they have to say matters. But that just goes on and on and on and on and kills a meeting. So my first thing is when I go into a meeting, I simply want to listen. I want to be the last to speak because I want to hear where everybody else is coming from. If you're brainstorming, if you're just kicking around ideas, if you're talking about a proposed strategy, before you blurt out something, listen to what other people have to say. I actually had an employee once that he felt like he had to blurt something out in every single meeting. And even, I'll never forget, from the first day of him coming onto our team, and he knew very little about what he did. He was an assistant. And yet we'd have a client meeting and he felt like he had to comment on everything. He literally could not keep his mouth shut. I'd pull him aside after meetings and say, look, you don't know what we've been working on with this client for the last 2 or 3 years. You don't know the process of how we got here and where we've come from. So just hold back before you offer your suggestions and ideas. He could not do it. He could not do it. He just blurted out his ideas and what he thought. It was so off base, so embarrassing. I finally had to let him go. Because it was becoming such a block, such an obstacle to making a meeting effective and moving it forward. So get in the habit of listening when it comes to a meeting. Number two, good example of this is number 2, if an idea does pop into your head, I'd encourage you to write it down first. This is something I do all the time. I never go into a meeting without my unique creative planner. And I've talked about that on many of these episodes. You can go find out about it at uniquecreativeplanner.com. I actually created that journal, that notebook, so when I'm in a meeting, I have a brainstorm or an idea, something pops into my head, I want to jot it down. Because you know what it does? When you write that idea down, it forces you to think about it. Sometimes what pops into our head is half-formed. What pops into our heads are maybe a little off base. So writing it down forces you to look at it and actually think about it. It also gives you a minute to decide if it's worth contributing or not. So I'll write it down, and then when the appropriate time comes, I'll interject, I'll throw it into the conversation. Because remember, very often, the time the idea pops in your head isn't the most effective time to share it. Maybe in the middle of an explanation or a presentation by someone else. So number 2, write it down. Very important. That'll help you kind of really coalesce that idea and make it worth sharing. The third thing is, when you do contribute, when you do step up and start contributing in a meeting, don't tell us about your life story. Don't go into all the detail about why this happened. Don't go into the whole background about your idea. Let me tell you, or some great detail about an insight you recently read about. Value the people's time in that meeting. And above all, don't preach. I was in a meeting just the other day. Guy got his moment in the sun, and he just launched into a sermon. Oh my gosh, we're like 6 or 8 of us sitting around a table, and I just wanted to jump out a window. This is not the time for anybody to launch into a sermon when you're in a meeting. Don't give us too much backstory. Don't go into too much detail. If there's great detail you want to share with the team, fine. Submit it in a written report. Follow up with an email. But during that time, value people's time. They've come together for this meeting to help move this project or idea forward. Honor their time. Don't go into such incredible detail. Number 4, do your homework. I really want to emphasize, do your homework. Nothing is more embarrassing than being in a meeting and tossing out an idea that's already been thought of, that they've already been through. Nothing is more humiliating or an embarrassing thing. Do your homework. In other words, before you walk into that meeting, learn the client. Understand where they've been. Understand what's been tried. If you're new to a meeting, like sometimes as you move up in your career, you get privy to more and more upper level meetings. As you do, before you blurt something out or before you share your ideas, make sure before the meeting ever starts that you've done your homework. What has this meeting been accomplished over the years? Or accomplishing over the years? What is that client? Where's that project? What stage is it in? Learn all that before you walk into the meeting, because you never want to just throw out ideas that were tried a year or 2 ago and most often failed. So do your homework. Again, it honors the people in the room, and it doesn't allow you to walk in a meeting blind. The worst thing you can possibly do is walk into a meeting blind. In fact, I'm a big believer in having the meeting before the meeting. Before I walk into a new meeting that I've never done before, not only will I do homework, I'll ask around. I'll talk to people about where they've been, what they're doing, what the purpose of the meeting is, where everybody is, in that food chain and in that process. It's very, very important. Do your homework. Number 5, please stop interrupting people. This is very often we get in a meeting and an idea will pop into our head, and it's an exciting idea. We feel like it's worth contributing, and again, we just pop it off. Let me tell you something. You've just alienated that person you interrupted. Again, I go back to number 2. When that idea pops in your head, write it down first. Write it down. Learn to control yourself. Self-discipline matters in meetings. Learn to control yourself. Don't just interrupt. I'll tell you, one of the worst things you can do, and this is true in any business setting, in any career setting, when it comes to conversation, when it comes to meetings, when it comes to presentation, the worst thing you can do is interrupt people. Constant interruption will drive people nuts. And trust me, they will not be your friend. They will not be your friend. If I'm constantly interrupting you, you're going to get angry after a while, and you're not going to be on my side of the table. So think about, again, it's about honoring the other people in the room. Stop interrupting people. And finally, the 6th point I would make is never dominate a meeting. So often I'll be in meetings and one person, for whatever reason, it could be the CEO, it could be the lowest level person in the meeting, whatever, they end up dominating the meeting. I'll tell you what, just never put yourself in a position where you're speaking so much. Listen to yourself. Never get in a place where you're talking so much that you literally dominate the meeting. And how do you tell? Number one, you tell just by the amount you're talking versus other people. Number two, look at people's reactions. When you're presenting in a meeting and it's your time to share, look at people's reaction. Are they listening? Have they tuned you out? Are they checking their iPhone? I'll tell you, you can tell so much about your effectiveness simply by listening and watching the reaction of other people in the room. You know, my dad was a pastor. And he did, every once in a while in the service, he'd encourage us to have what he called popcorn testimonies. You know, pop up, pop off, and pop back down. Don't make it long. Don't drag it out. Just get up, share what God's done in your life, and sit back down. That's the way we need to run meetings. Let's have popcorn meetings. Think in terms of speaking up, getting to the point, being intentional, being direct, and then shutting up and let other people respond and let them talk. So never, ever dominate a meeting. And that was final, but let me say this last thing. This could be number 7, I guess. Always have a hard out, which means have a hard ending time. When they walk in, they need to know when they're going to walk out. You know, unless this is one of those last minute desperate meetings where we're going to stay here till we figure out our strategy, which I don't recommend those kind of meetings. They don't work generally. And by the way, while on that subject, brainstorming is a myth. If you think you can brainstorm a better idea in a meeting, forget it. Maybe we'll do an episode on that. But I'm just not a brainstorming person. I don't believe it happens. I think real genius, real creativity happens on your own, behind a closed door when you're working on that project. Simply being in a room and kicking ideas around can be fun. It can be interesting. But I just don't think great breakthroughs happen in a brainstorming session. Just doesn't happen. But back to the meeting, have a heart out. Know when they go in. It can be on your agenda that you give everybody when they walk in the door, when they are going to leave. Trust me, they will thank you later. Now, let me give you a little bonus thing when it comes to meetings, a little bonus session here, free of charge. And that is how to behave when you're in other people's meetings. So here's a setting. As you move up your career, as you go to a higher and higher level in your career, you're going to be, as I said before, invited into higher level meetings. Sometimes into meetings that you don't even know the players. You don't even know the people around the table. Maybe you're an intern, maybe you're an assistant, or maybe you've just been promoted to a level where now you have access to higher level meetings, and it's not your meeting. You didn't call it. You don't know much about the project. You weren't able to do any homework because it's somebody else's meeting. I'll give you an example. I was in South Africa just a few years ago, and I was visiting Doxodeo, Alan Platt's church. Alan is a pastor of Doxodeo Church in South Africa. They've got multiple campuses all over South Africa. It's a fantastic church, and I think Alan is one of the great leadership consultants of our time. He's not just a great pastor, he's a great leadership consultant. He's brilliant at developing leaders. And I was speaking at Doxodeo, speaking at Alan's church, and he invited me to a meeting of, it was an organization called Movement Day. It was going to happen in New York City, and they had invited 50 global leaders from literally around the world together for a meeting. Now, this meeting had been going on for literally 2 years. And these guys knew each other. These men and women knew each other. They had been working together for 2 years, planning this day of workshops and sessions and training in New York City that would eventually help spawn gospel movements in major cities all over the world. So it was an important meeting, and it happened to be one of his meetings. This one happened to be in South Africa. They'd been doing them in various major cities around the world. And Alan invited me to come in and sit on the meeting. And as I was sitting there listening to how the meeting was progressing, trust me, I had ideas. I had plenty of things that popped into my head about how they could do this better or some ideas that might help. But I actually made a ton of notes. And here's some of the things I learned from sitting in on that meeting. Number one, when you're invited to a meeting that's not yours, it's not yours, so step back. Chill. Don't be nearly as intentional or aggressive, or don't contribute in the same way you would if it was your meeting or your team's meeting or your company meeting. In other words, you don't know these people, you don't know where they've been, so just step back. Number two, as I learned in that particular meeting in South Africa, The event has been in the planning stages for years. These were people that knew each other really well. They'd been through a lot. They had taken this from just a kernel of an idea to a really developed level. So I don't know what they've talked about. Something that I may throw in, some idea I may think is important, is something they had thrown out a year ago. We've talked about this. So this is a great place where that is really vital. Don't be so quick to throw stuff out because you don't know where they are. I had ideas that I thought were worth contributing. I held them back. I just wrote them down. I didn't want to throw it into a mix where they've already tried it before and they would consider me an idiot or it would waste their time. Number 3, I wrote this down. It's always important to practice discernment when you're in a meeting or in a group that you're unfamiliar with. I didn't know, when I walked into that meeting, I didn't know what their theological perspective was. I didn't know what their leadership perspective was, their business perspective was, their teaching perspective. There were so many things about these people because they came from a multitude of countries. Some were secular, some were worked in church or ministry or nonprofit or NGO sectors. I didn't really know where they came from. So I just knew that speaking too soon was a recipe for disaster. So whenever you're unfamiliar with the backgrounds of the people in the room, practice discernment. Use that as an opportunity to learn and hear from leaders from a variety of perspectives more than feeling that you need to contribute your brilliant ideas. And number 4, and what I was doing the whole time was number 4 is make notes. So here's what I did. I wrote down things that I thought were good ideas. I wasn't hesitant to jot down, things that sparked or things that popped into my mind, but instead of blurting them out in the meeting and potentially wasting their time and potentially making them think I was an idiot, I shared them with Alan later. I pulled Alan Platt aside later and I said, hey, here's some thoughts that I jotted down about the meeting. In fact, I think I sent him an email to him later because it gave me even more time to think about them and really distill the thoughts and keep the good ones, throw the bad ones out. But I said, I wanted to know if you've ever thought of these things or maybe these might help. If not, feel free to throw them out. And trust me, he took them so well because some of the ideas they hadn't thought about. And he immediately implemented them and shared it with everybody on the team, which made me look like a hero afterwards. But he also filtered out the ones they'd already covered. So by taking notes and sharing them later with someone that you're comfortable with and that that is a secret to helping those ideas actually proliferate instead of just feeling like you have to do it at the meeting. The key is honor the table. Honor the people in the room. When you're invited to a meeting where you don't know people, and trust me, I go to these in Hollywood all the time. I've invited to a pitch meeting in a studio or a strategy meeting in a television network, and I walk into a room where I don't know anybody there. Rather than trying to convince them that I'm a genius, and trust me, I see this all the time with people who are radically insecure. Trust me, Hollywood is filled with raging insecurity. And I see people that walk in and are so determined to prove to everybody that they ought to be there, that they have the right to be there, that they're a brilliant genius, that they immediately start blurting ideas out, and all they do is alienate people and make themselves look foolish. So it'll save you a lot of embarrassment in your career if you learn to actually discipline yourself so that you can contribute in meetings in a way that'll help you get from where you are to where you want to be. Now, I've done other episodes and will do episodes on how to have good meetings. I'm a big believer that the meetings should be relatively short. These are not social times where you sit around and drink coffee and eat donuts. These are times when you need to be intentional, and sometimes those meetings can be had standing up. It's kind of popular now to do meetings where everybody's walking around. That's a little difficult if you're dealing with women in heels or you're on a schedule. But however you do the meeting, think in terms of how do we get the most information to people when they need it to help them move forward with the project, with the client, with their career. That's what a meeting is about. It's not to figure out what your kids did for the summer. It's not to figure out how great vacation you had. It's time to get things done. If you do that, people will honor you. People will value your time in meetings, and it'll help you go to the next level in your career. Thanks for listening. Thanks so much for listening. I just appreciate so much that you do this, that you rate us, that you put comments down on the blog, and I just think and the podcast, I think it's really important that you do to help people get the message out. Come visit us at philcooke.com. That's where I live, and it's where most of these ideas are discussed. I'd love to see you there on social media at Phil Cooke, PhilCooke on Twitter and Instagram. Come check them out. I'd love for you to start following and be a part of this conversation about how you can use the media more effectively in helping make your career something that matters.